Thank you so much, Martin. And it's a great pleasure to be with all of you um, around the globe, all digital. I mean, you had to adapt very quickly to all digital again, but nevertheless, we move forward. So it's great to be able to talk to you about the combination of sustainability and technology, because that is the specific topic I would like to address. And it's a great opportunity because many of you are very innovative entrepreneurs and people and really motivated to take up on all of the opportunities at this time. And at this current time, we find ourselves in a specific moment because thankfully we're more or less phasing out of the pandemic currently, and still with hiccups and still not easy, but phasing out. And of course, it has been a very, very difficult period for many, and it has been difficult for many of you, suffering in businesses, suffering from personal losses. But let's also spend a moment of time thinking about what we've learned. We've learned so much. We've learned, for instance, that when we are in a lockdown, the planet can recuperate much quicker than we ever thought. We have seen rivers in India, for instance, clearing up. We have seen skies in Asia for the first time being more healthy. We've seen cities that were much more livable than before. So it was indeed a wake-up call, so to say, how to take care of not only ourselves, but also our planet. At the same time, we've seen technology being extremely helpful throughout this pandemic. And I sincerely hope that trust in technology, which has grown because of the application throughout the pandemic, will stay, because that's one of the problems we face currently, that people generally, and even more so younger generations, lack trust in technology, which is of course very important to be able to benefit from all of the technological advancements. But we have seen robots that could clean hospitals when people couldn't, because we are vulnerable to being infected. We have seen drones that take medicine and supplies to places we couldn't come. And we've seen a lot of innovations around the vaccines and the testing that weren't there before. We have seen great inventions how to provide for more oxygen throughout the pandemic, and so on and so on. So actually, the two angles we'll discuss right now have been demonstrated like never before throughout this pandemic. And I hope that good things come out of that and will be there to stay. Because, ladies and gentlemen, currently we have what I call a window of opportunity. We are at a stage where we really, really drastically need to improve the state of the world. And then I talk about both planet and people. And there's a period where we have moved out of the third industrial revolution and moved in the fourth industrial revolution. And now we're in an era where we can blend digital and physical technologies as to create great solutions for the planet and the people. And I very much hope that you all listening to this keynote and attending those 2 days are very much motivated to do so, because we need you all, regardless of your specific role, your specific place in the earth, or your specific company. Now, allow me to show you the SDGs, or the global goals or sustainable development goals as they are addressed. I'm not sure if you are aware of these. If you're not, it's very helpful to know more about these 17 goals. They are actually what I call the new definition of sustainability. It are the 17 things we need to solve by 2030. Imagine that in 2015, actually 193 countries signed up to what I call the new agenda for the world, the new moral compass, so to say, the new way forward. And at that moment in time, those 193 countries, and imagine that is a huge moment in time, because rarely do many countries come to concrete solutions together anyway. So this was a huge moment in time, and they are all still in. We defined that we want to have a world in 2030 where we have ample poverty, where we beat most of the poverty around the world, where we make sure that young children don't die because they don't have access to medicine or food, where we beat the current problems in terms of health and well-being, where we make sure that every child in the world has access to education, where we beat inequality around the world, whereas now, for instance, we talk about inequality in the Western world, in Europe, as in females in the top of organizations, for instance. But imagine that in rural South African countries, most women provide work but don't have an official status as such. So we want to beat climate change, obviously, and so on and so on. These 70 goals are actually intertwined. And though it may daunt you in the beginning saying, well, these are too many things, I can't deal with it, you don't have to. Choose a couple you can address. We'll go into that later and make sure you have positive impact on that, because we need to make great progress. We lack progress. And of course, the pandemic threw millions of people back into poverty. We were really on the good way forward. But of course, it was a huge throwback throughout the pandemic. And now we have to work to come out of that situation again. These 17 goals are described everywhere. You can read up on it in my book, The $1 Trillion Shift, which I'll show you later on. But there's also many very accessible apps to download on your phone or your iPad or whatever. And you can find there the 17 goals, their targets, very specific targets, as well as their indicators. So it's actually quite helpful to work with. It's also a great branding opportunity, a great opportunity to make clear with your company what you contribute to these goals. And that is very important to communicate to all of your stakeholders. Now, but it also taught us that when we see what we need to do by 2030, when we see that we have way too much carbon in the world, a topic you've been talking about yesterday in a very innovative way, how can we solve all this carbon that is in the world? On the one hand, stop it coming into our world, but also disseminate the majority we have and we don't need. But it made us realize, and when I say it made us realize, I mean the front runners, because not everybody does, of course, by now. But we've come to the realization that it's not good enough to just mitigate your impact. It's not good enough to reduce. It's not good enough to follow the incremental path, so to say, and to say, oh, well, I'll do a little bit less bad. It's not even good enough to say, I'll reduce to zero. So for instance, I will have no CO2 impact in the world anymore. Allow me to give you an example. You see an image here of the ocean, and you see the ocean cleanup, and hopefully you know what that is. It's an invention of Blind Slut, a Dutch guy that made this invention. But imagine that our oceans with no action will have more plastic in the sea than fish in 2050. Imagine you fishing, the chance of you actually getting some plastic is higher than you getting any fish at all. So that means that that plastic will stay in the sea for 500 years because it's decomposable. It will break up in little bits, get into the sea, get into the fish, get into everywhere, and destroy a lot of value of the nature. So imagine if we don't produce plastics anymore, we're still with a plastic soup left over the size of Russia in the oceans. So we actually have to get it out. So that means that the way forward is actually to create positive impact. So the way forward is net positive impact, meaning that your company or your initiative or your city has a positive impact on the world. Now, recently, we have been talking about disconnecting growth and impact, and you might read about those sentences saying, well, our company will grow, but our negative impact will grow less. But actually now we should reconnect growth and impact and saying, the larger my company is, the larger my initiative is, the more scale I have, the more positive impact I have. And that is a company or an initiative that serves the world and its people and actually is part of the solution rather than the problem. Please keep that in mind. That is absolutely the way forward, and not only because of moral and sustainability reasons, but also equally for business reasons. The more innovative you are, the better it is, because it's radical innovations we need. Now, there is a price for that. And we've done a lot of research, and these are some results of the Global Business Commission. We researched that in total, we can expect a price of $12 trillion markets to be unlocked until 2030. I mean, these are numbers that are actually unimaginable, and it doesn't matter if it's 11 or 13 or whatever. The fact of the matter is that there's a lot of new markets to unlock for those that come up with positive impact solutions on these SDGs, because in the end of the day, the world needs those solutions. The markets, the economic markets, play a huge role in that. So companies addressing that will indeed be successful. And throughout the pandemic, we've already seen that positive ESG companies and investments have been much more resilient and much more popular, and we're on a great rise, especially ESG investments grow with staggering numbers throughout the pandemic and will continue to do so. So tied into the $12 trillion markets is 350 million additional new jobs around the world, because it's new jobs, it's new work, it's new opportunities in those new markets. Now, this might seem easy, and then you might think, well, I'm an entrepreneur and I don't find it that easy. And you're absolutely right. It is not easy. Currently, for instance, we don't internalize external cost. We ample put a price on CO2, and hopefully this is going to change quickly. And we don't put a price on the use of raw materials, resources, or pollution, even other than CO2. And we've also researched that, and we came to the conclusion that if we would do that, if we would include all those externalities, the average sustainable business case will improve, and you won't believe this, with 45%. So imagine if you're having a difficult time now because the price of your product is still higher than the non-sustainable price in terms of, for instance, if you have a recycling product, then the future is on your side, because it's not a matter if, but it's a matter when. And when the shift happens, then you'll be on the right path to the future. So it's only thinking about short term or long term. And currently, sustainable solutions get cheaper and cheaper. So the shift is already happening. Now, those market opportunities are in what we call four economical systems. This is just a difficult word for broad defined sectors. And have a look if you feel at home in one of those four. And of course, there are vast descriptions, but that's where all the opportunities arise. For instance, cities in the future will be like a marketplace of resources, because a lot needs to happen to not use virgin materials anymore, to not use fossil energy anymore, to provide for all the food in the city that is necessary, and to provide for all the energy and infrastructure and mobility. Energy materials goes without saying. Health and well-being is a vast market already and will grow significantly, because we need more healthy food, but also we need more well-being. Currently, we waste and lose over 1/3 of the food that's being produced, which is in the end not consumed. But at the same time, we have more people dying from obesitas than people dying from lack of food. So these are all huge problems, and positive impact business will address those problems and come up with solutions, and then have a good business case out of that. A lot has been said currently about purpose, and sometimes rightfully so, and sometimes it's more of a fashionable word to use, but it means reason to be. A purpose-led company has a true, authentic reason to be, and so it ties into the positive impact companies, because a purpose must be something positive you create in the world. It only works if you mean it. It only works if you're truly authentic about your purpose. It might be worthwhile to have a think about it. what is the purpose of your initiative or your project in a city or your company? If you know that, and if you work with that purpose consistently, if you then relate it to having a positive impact on these SDGs while leveraging your technology, we'll get to that in a minute, then you can be absolutely successful because that works. Even more so because in the near future, we have new generations phasing in, like the millennials and Generation Z. And in no time, they'll be the majority of your market, as well as your employees, your shareholders, and your other stakeholders. And this generation, and you see in the slide, hopefully you recognize her, Greta Thunberg, who around the world is telling her story that she's fed up and doesn't accept inaction on climate change. And it's just an example, but these generations are not going to sit back. These generations want action, but they also vote with their feet, you could say. These generations are willing and able to pay more for sustainable products. They prefer biological and natural food and products. They want to work for a purpose-driven company, and they want to relate to purpose-driven companies, being an employee, being a client, or in any other way. So make sure to address that generation and think about if you communicate from your company or your project or initiative to address those new generations, because they're there to stay for the longer term and phasing in. A couple of examples from my book, The $1 Trillion Shift, how companies do this. Interface, for instance, is a company based in the US, which is a carpet tile company. And you could say, well, carpet tiles is a really boring product. And right, but they made it into a huge story because they said after having achieved their mission zero, meaning having no impact in terms of climate change, they said, no, we want to have a positive impact, just like I explained just before. We want to be part of the solution in this world. So we want to get rid of waste in the world. And to give you an example, they started their networks, which was a global project to use discarded fisher nets in the sea as input for their production cycle. These discarded nets in the ocean did a lot of damage to the coral reefs, to fish, etc. And they solved that problem. It might seem small, but we're talking about millions and millions of those fisher nets. They have another project called Climate Take Back, where, and you've heard some examples like that yesterday, they use carbon as their friend, so to say, and make it into a resource for their carpets. So they're actually cleaning up the air, putting it in their carpets. And of course, that is a fact and something that really helps the world. But imagine it's also a story. It's something that people can relate to and people like, being it employees or clients. So they have seen huge growth around the world with all of these new initiatives. The brand has improved, they have improved their value on the stocks, and they're a really popular company for people to work for. And of course, many amongst you do similar things the same. It's often said that listed companies can't do it. And I just want to address very quickly DSM, which was originally a coal mine. So it can be done. A company can repurpose. It means shifting from thinking, what is your product? So for instance, coal mines in this case, or any other fossil energy or any other non-sustainable product. Thinking about, but not so much what is our product, but what are our competencies? What are we really good at? And DSM found out that we are really good at science. And we can use that for other things than fossil energy materials. So they changed, they completely shifted in the end to resource, health, and material science company, bringing forth solutions that have a positive impact on both planet and people. And they did that consistently. And they were able to convince investors as well. So that really works. In fact, Cybisma, its CEO, which is a good friend of mine, really demonstrated that purpose-driven and performance-led really works. Now, I mentioned we have a window of time, and we have a unique moment in time where we can actually synergize technology and sustainability. And that is absolutely the way forward. And it is also the only way forward, because those huge challenges I demonstrated with the SDGs, we can only solve them if we use technology for good. It's the biggest accelerating power we have. It makes more radical solutions possible, and it makes it faster available, and it makes it possible to create far bigger impact and larger scale. So the way forward is to really use these new advanced technologies to address sustainability challenges. And this is a very simple model I use in my new book, Tech for Good, to show that companies should be high on both sustainability as well as technology. And this doesn't apply only for tech companies, it applies to every single business, regardless of the sector, because you can always integrate possibilities of technologies, regardless your sector. This is a brief image of 8 advanced technologies I have identified to be very influential in the next decade, like advanced robotics, 3D printing. To give you an example of the 3D printing, I told you the story about Interface using the discarded nets in tropical seas for their carpets. Equally, 3D printing can now restore coral reefs, because we can print out masses to integrate in the coral reefs, and thus we can win time, hundreds of years literally, which it would have cost nature to recuperate. We can have technology speeding up the recovery process enormously. So the impact of technology cannot be overestimated. And I ask you all, regardless of the sector your initiative, project, city, whatever is in, to really have a good look at what technologies are there that could help you in your mission, in your purpose of your company, and apply it to its maximum. And don't think it's something only to do for large tech companies. No, it's equally important for mid-sized companies, startups and scale-ups that can start purpose-driven from scratch, but also large companies need the innovations from small companies, because a speedboat goes much faster than a tanker. Bear that in mind, you're equally important. Now, these 2 days, you'll hear a lot about significant examples. This is one I specifically like. For instance, it's called La Torre de las Especialidades. It's a hospital in Mexico that applies a Prosolver German technology to build a smoke eating front. It's a facing of a building that served the purpose of cleaning the air. It's another example on how business can be a force for good, and technology can be a force for good. I can give you many other examples. I lack the time for now, but I want to leave you with the thought that really technology, we must take the responsibility to have it serve a purpose and to serve the purpose of improving our world. We have only one planet. So we don't have a plan B, because there's simply no planet B. We have only this place, and we have to do with that. And I hope I give you a bit of inspiration additionally to your mission, to your purpose-driven initiative or company, to your opportunity to synergize technology and sustainability. I wish you a great second day of the MTech Day, and back to the studio, back to Martin right now.